Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. The European Commission is set to announce its proposal for the next multi-annual financial framework, the EU's 7-year budget that will shape spending priorities from 2028 onward. With growing political tensions inside the Commission and pressure from national governments, all eyes are on how much money will be allocated to key areas like cohesion, science, and social policy. Will poor regions continue to receive strong support, or are we heading toward a shift in EU priorities? To help us unpack what is at stake, we're joined by Heather Grabbe, Senior Fellow at Bruegel, a think tank that specializes in economics. Hello, ma'am, and welcome to TVP World.
Pleasure to be with you.
So first, can you help us set the stage here? How has the Central Eastern European region benefited from EU funds, and why is the announcement of this new multi-annual financial framework so important and significant for EU's future?
Well, since the accession of Poland and other Central European countries in 2004, and then Romania and Bulgaria in 2007, the region has received EU funding of up to 4% of GDP per year, which is really a lot of money, which has helped to build a great deal of infrastructure. Throughout Poland, for example, you see bridges and highways and cycle networks built with EU regional funding. And of course, Poland's farmers have benefited from agricultural subsidies. So particularly for Central Europe, the EU budget has been an important source of very reliable money, which doesn't depend on the business cycle or on private investment and so on. But one of the big differences between the Central Europeans and the older member states is that up till now, their farmers have received a lower level of payments per hectare of agricultural land, and also the overall payments have depended a lot on poorer regions receiving money directly, because there's been this regional key which determined the payments. But now the Commission is about to propose a very different kind of budget, which is structured quite differently, and therefore will have a quite different set of calculations for the Central Europeans to make.
All right, so speaking of this different set of calculations, how will this budget shape EU's priorities between 2028 and the next 7 years? How is that going to impact the region? Do you expect any cuts or any shifting of priorities?
Well, the official proposal will be made later today, and it's been kept very tightly guarded in Brussels. So there have been some leaks of some aspects of it, but we don't know the full picture yet. So we'll find out later today. But what it sounds like is that the Commission will propose a national envelope for each country, which is very different from in the past, where there's a specific amount of money set aside for that country. But of course, then it's based on what's called performance budgeting. So that means conditions on that money being received. So, for example, Poland will have an indicative amount of money overall and more latitude than they had in the past about what to spend it on. For example, if Poland wants to spend more of that money on defense, then that's allowed, also on other priorities like innovation. But the conditions mean that there is a risk that countries won't necessarily get their money if they don't meet criteria and they don't actually get the outcomes that they promise. In the past, they almost certainly got the money, almost no matter what. But there wasn't a national budget. So this new approach has pluses and minuses for governments. It means they are clearer about what kind of overall sum they will receive, and then they can negotiate on that basis. But some of them, if, for example, there's misspending, maladministration of the kind that we've seen in Hungary in past budgets, then Hungary might not get as much money because they haven't actually met the conditions, or there's been evidence of fraud, or they haven't spent the money in the way that they were supposed to under the rules. So this single envelope is very different. And it also means that there's going to be less money to poorer regions. So a country that has a lower gross national income overall will probably get more money. So that's good news for the relatively poorer member states. But it means that poorer regions in better off countries, for example, the poorer regions of France or Spain or even Germany, will probably get less money because the overall national GNI of their country is higher, and there won't be a separate cohesion fund which provides specific funding for poorer regions.
So do you expect this cohesion policy to take a hit in this new plan? There have already been some reports suggesting that there might be a reduction in funding, like you mentioned, for these poor regions.
Yes, there have been a fair number of leaks. One of the leaks suggests that there could be a merging of the cohesion fund, which goes to poorer regions, with the common agricultural policy in order to boost the agriculture budget and maintain the overall level of subsidies. And of course, the regions don't like this at all because they won't necessarily get more money from the national envelope from their national government. You know, say you're a poor region of Spain and you're receiving money directly from Brussels right now. You're receiving money from the EU itself. Can you be sure that Madrid will give you the same amount of money from the national envelope? No, you can't be sure of that. So that's why the regions are not happy about this proposal. But the reason why the Commission is proposing this is in order to allow more latitude to determine national level priorities, especially things like defence, and to try to basically keep the budget balance. Because after all, the total size of the budget is very much a contentious issue and will be a matter of fierce negotiations in the years to come.
Do you think this conditionality when it comes to the cohesive fund would actually bring about political tensions that ironically impact the cohesiveness of the bloc?
Well, it's not the cohesion fund exactly that would cause this. I think that's more about the relationship between central governments and regional governments. It's more the question of whether the money gets spent in the way it was expected to. So in the past, the member states would agree on a budget where they had the priorities set and the overall amounts in different spending lines, and that would be agreed, and then they would have to do a rough calculation of how much their country might get. But then the money was pretty well guaranteed to come to them. Now it's different. Now they will know what's the overall envelope that they can expect, but they have to prove that they've spent the money well, and they have to submit national plans on how they're going to how to spend it. So the performance basis is quite different, and it will be hard at first for some countries to work out whether this, how to make that system work for them, and that's why it's complicated. And I think the thing that really concerns me about the way this is being done is that some of the dedicated funding for important priorities that are for the common good could get lost because national governments are less interested in them. If you think about European public goods, things that we all need in Europe, like, for example, clean water and water supply across boundaries or biodiversity, those won't necessarily get any dedicated funding anymore. But an individual national government may not be interested in funding something that has cross-border consequences. They might want to give priority to things that benefit only their country rather than things that benefit the EU as a whole. So that loss of European public good funding could be a real problem from this new method of budgeting.
All right, and speaking of these public goods, do you think that we might see a prioritization of defense spending and perhaps seeing all these other aspects take a hit as well?
It's very likely that there will be a big uptick in defence spending because we've just had the NATO summit where countries have promised to spend a much higher proportion of their GDP on defence. Poland is, of course, aiming, like quite a few others, for 5% of GDP, which is an enormous amount of money. And so they will want every help they can get from the EU budget and any source of money. But that's still tricky because in order to have a much higher level of overall spending, the Commission is likely to propose a larger budget overall. At the moment, the budget, the current budget is about 1.1% of EU gross national income. They want to raise it to about 1.26% of gross national income. That doesn't sound like a huge difference, 0.05, but that's 1.78 trillion euro, which is a 60% increase on what the budget is now. So it's a on the overall payments rather. And there are quite a few frugal member states that don't want to see that increase, even though they do want to increase defense spending. So if we think about Germany, the Netherlands, the Scandinavian and Nordic countries, Austria, they don't want to see a larger EU budget, but they do want to spend more in defence. So what will they do? Will they argue to keep the budget at its current rate, but other forms of defence spending outside the budget, for example, through the SAFE programme and other intergovernmental structures? So there are different ways of spending, of funding defence. And there's still the question about whether the EU needs new revenues to increase the size of the budget and whether it should issue common debt also to fund defence. Those are big debates that will be going on around the budget negotiations.
Right, that's something I actually want to touch upon. Like you mentioned, perhaps this MFF is a little bit more ambitious than a lot of people were led to believe. Do you think that you can realistically implement it without revisiting the issue of things like common borrowing, especially if major contributors are resisting budget expansion?
Yeah, the common borrowing issue is going to come back in a big way. Under the Polish presidency of the EU that just finished at the end of June, they made a lot of progress on this issue of having common defence procurement, so having weapons procurement projects that countries do together. And the question is how much common funding could happen, particularly through debt financing. Germany has also, with the new coalition government, just taken the debt brake off to allow it to borrow a lot more. And just today, it looks like there will be a different way of calculating Germany's growth to allow Germany to borrow more as well. So borrowing is much more the order of the day. But that's difficult with the EU budget because the EU budget still has to cover the debt repayments from the pandemic era borrowing. So, the EU is still having to find 25 billion euros every year to repay the debts that were incurred through all the COVID funds, the Resilience and Recovery Facility and others, Next Generation EU. So countries very much have that in mind, that common borrowing now might appease Trump by allowing them to raise defense spending very quickly, but interest rates are going up. And they will have to repay that debt in the future, and that could cause difficulties further down the road.
Right, so we're still looking at a lot of moving pieces, but in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Pleasure.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.